Liz Truss is way ahead in the Tory leadership race and therefore looks set to be our next Prime Minister. That's a problem because her principal plan announced this week was to cut millions of people's wages. The policy was briefed to journalists late on Monday night. Martin Kimber is a journalist at Sky News. He tweeted this: "Breaking. Liz Truss says she'll cut £11 billion from the civil service if elected Prime Minister. She'll cut civil servants' time off from 27 to 25 days and scrap the role of diversity officers. £8.8 billion will be saved by cutting the pay of those living outside London and the South East." You can see the thinking behind this policy. Liz Truss is offering billions of pounds in tax cuts, but she doesn't want to tell people their services or pensions will be cut. So instead, she's looking to trim the fat behind the scenes. And the main way she's proposing to do this is to weight civil servants' pay to the cost of wherever they live. A briefing note sent from the Truss campaign to journalists explained the thinking. Liz Truss will introduce pay boards tailoring pay to the cost of living where civil servants actually work. National pay boards mean that civil servants' pay is negotiated at a national level, meaning no account is taken of the regional cost of living. By introducing regional boards, civil servants' pay can be adjusted in line with the actual areas where civil servants work, saving billions. They also said in their briefing that this could save up to £8.8 billion per year. Now, hundreds of thousands of civil servants getting a pay cut would be controversial enough in the midst of a cost of living crisis, but the real implications of this policy briefing were even worse. Wonks immediately started to question Team Truss's numbers, and Alex Thomas from the Institute for Government tweeted this: "It's impossible to save £8.8 billion from civil service wages. The entire civil service wage bill is £9 billion. Truss's plans must refer to the wider public sector. So this isn't mandarins moving from London, it's nurses, teachers' pay being adjusted down. Less war on Whitehall, more war on Workington." And what this is, what this policy looked like in the middle of a leadership campaign, a party that says it's committed to levelling up has a future leader, Truss, appearing to be proposing pay cuts for nurses, teachers, and all public sector workers who live outside the South East and London. So could that really be the case? Well, the following morning, Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's backing Truss, suggested there'd been some mix-up.
But it's not just the civil service, is it? Liz Truss is also talking about anyone's pay for the government. That involves teachers, that involves police officers, involves nurses, doesn't it?
That's not the plan. The discussion at the moment is around civil servants.
That was Rees-Mogg suggesting Truss's plan definitely would not affect public sector workers in general. But as the tweet I showed you earlier explained, if that was the case, the sums just didn't add up. Which is why, by lunchtime, Truss was forced into a humiliating U-turn.
My policy on this has been misrepresented. There was never any intention to affect teachers and nurses. But I don't want to worry people. I don't want people to be concerned. So I am being very clear that we will not be going ahead with the regional pay boards.
A major U-turn, then?
With national pay boards.
Is this a Liz Truss U-turn?
I'm being honest that there were concerns expressed. I believe my policy was being misinterpreted.
So you're not
I want to be clear with the public that I will not be going ahead with the regional pay boards. I'm somebody who is honest and upfront, and I do what I say I will do, and I'm being clear, I will not be doing that.
So that was Liz Truss going against her own policy announcement less than 24 hours later. That claim that the policy had been misrepresented also caused some problems, though, especially for the people on Team Liz. Brandon Lewis spoke to Radio 4.
She wasn't misrepresented, was she?
No, she was.
Okay, who misrepresented her? Let's be completely clear about that if that's what she believes.
Absolutely. You saw people yesterday from the Rishi Sunak campaign outlining that this was going to mean a pay cut for public sector workers. That was never the case. That was never suggested in anything. We've been very clear.
Well, it would have if it was brought in for all public sector workers in the long term.
No, this was always looking at what would happen with new contracts for new staff who take them on. But as I say, Liz was very clear yesterday. This is not a policy that she's taking forward. She wants to focus focus on dealing with Whitehall waste.
How long term was the all public sector workers plan? It's decades then, isn't it? If you're waiting for everyone currently serving to leave the civil service.
Well, no, as I said, this was
service.
about potentially new contracts coming on and making sure that you're using taxpayers' money efficiently and effectively, and that was part of the wider.
It's going to take you a long time to save £8.8 billion.
Well, no, that wasn't what we were saying. What we're saying in the press release, as you said, was if you extrapolated this out, that's what you can do. And other people were giving different figures. But look, the reality is what Liz was outlining as a package yesterday was how you deal with Whitehall waste. One of the things we've all been targeted with by the Treasury itself, actually, and the current Prime Minister, is to deal with some of the waste we've seen in Whitehall, the growth we've seen in the civil service. Just in the last few years, we've seen roughly 91,000 more civil servants come into the sector.
Now, beyond Liz Truss being a bit of an amateur, I do think this isn't just a Westminster story. This isn't just, oh, look, she did a U-turn. What a mistake. What's happened here, I think, is really indicative of her campaign in general and also Tory politics in general. What they'll always say is we can make cuts to the state, we can make cuts to taxes, we can let the rich keep more of their money, but it's not going to affect you because what we're going to do is we're going to get all of this money from efficiency savings. Don't worry, you're not going to notice. Then what happens is quite clearly, efficiency savings, on the one hand, that means doing incredibly dangerous things like cutting down the number of hospital beds we have in our hospitals. So when a pandemic comes along, it's completely ready to collapse. Getting rid of things like nurses' bursaries. You might not notice in the first 2 or 3 years, but after a while, suddenly your health service is ready to collapse. They think you can do these things behind the scenes, but always it will have a real cost. If it saves significant money, we're going to feel it, essentially. So this policy is like basically everything the Tories say here. Either it's not going to save much money at all. We're just going to say, oh, we're going to stop using the printer so much in the Department of Health. Right? That's not going to save you a significant amount of money so that you can dramatically cut tax. If you want to dramatically cut tax, you're going to have to do really difficult, horrible things like cut the wages of loads of people or collapse the NHS. That's what the Tories have done for 12 years. And they still haven't learned. We've still got Liz Truss saying, I'm going to cut more taxes. I'm going to let the rich keep more money. But don't worry, you're not going to notice because all we're going to do is cut waste. The whole story completely unraveled in less than 24 hours. I'm now joined by Dalia Gabriel. I think that the Sunak campaign said, oh, this shows she's incompetent. She just does U-turns. Is what it really shows that the whole message of her campaign is a complete fraud.
Yeah, and I think that this is a taste of what is to come with the Truss premiership. It looks like it's set to be basically a continuation of all of the worst parts of the Johnson era without even having the false promise of levelling up. Actually, she's looking to level down. She's looking to decrease the wages of people who live outside of London. Again, what we're seeing is this continuation of the reactionary blustering, the ego-driven kind of governance, the buffoonish posturing that we saw in the Boris Johnson premiership, where on the face of it, you have this blatantly inaccurate policy announcement, saying that 8 billion can be cut by cutting the wages of civil servants. And then when challenged, they simply just dig their heels in, they lie, and eventually just try to act like it never happened, just kind of national gaslighting, etc. We're very used to this when it comes to, given that we've just come off several years of Boris Johnson. But I think you're right there, Michael, to really hone in on behind the theatrics and behind the kind of incompetence narrative, actually looking at what this policy indicates about the politics and the deeply reactionary ideology that sits behind this policy announcement. Because what this policy is essentially about, as you said, is it's about painting the public sector as the enemy, essentially, as the enemy of the middle class and the working class, as something that needs to be starved, that needs to be strangled of its power, to do anything other than just funnel wealth from the poorest and the middle of society into the already very wealthy. Whether that's, through indirectly through tax cuts and tax subsidies, or whether it's through literally handing over vast sums of public money to the corporate sector. Because let's not forget, with all this talk of inefficiency and balancing the budget and being really rigorous with every penny of public money that's spent on, nurses' wages, etc., let's not forget that whilst the government likes to portray the public sector as wasteful and bloated, as having too much money, not having enough sense, or as unaccountable. This is the same government that has absolutely no problem hemorrhaging money with no accountability, with no transparency to the corporate sector. And, we can even look at the fact that a judge ruled that in the middle of a pandemic, this government, well, the previous government, which is going to continue with the next Truss government, actually acted unlawfully in creating VIP lanes for their corporate mates, for their mates in the corporate sector, to get first dibs on very important, essential COVID contracts in the middle of a pandemic. That was actually ruled unlawful by a judge. 11 billion pounds of public money was given to companies that either were directly connected to Conservative MPs or were companies that had absolutely no prior experience of the work that they were contracted to do. 37 billion pounds was spent on a track and trace system that failed its main objective. So how can the government claim to be so concerned with how public money is spent to the point that they're cutting public sector worker wages in the middle of a cost of living crisis when they are so liberal and loose with the public purse when it comes to shelling out to their corporate mates? Well, it's because this is not about the economic fallacy of balancing a budget. That's obviously not how the government expenditure works. This is about rewiring public money away from the public whose money that is and from the public good, and towards the already very rich and well-connected, who, of course, more often than not, do not pay tax and do not contribute to that public purse or to public money themselves. So you're kind of killing two birds with one stone with a policy like this. You are stigmatizing the public sector as inefficient, as ineffective, and thereby paving the way towards privatization, which is what we're seeing in the NHS and what I think we will continue to see with further years of Tory leadership. But you're also actually doing the physical, moving of public money from the public sector and from the public where it's supposed to be and where it's supposed to be funneled towards, and towards the very rich. And we saw that in the pandemic. So when you look beneath the bluster of this U-turn and the kind of politicking, what is actually really important here is the ideological clue that it gives us, which is that, is to be expected, Truss is going to continue the same old Tory tale of robbing the poor and the middle classes to feed the limitless greed of the very wealthy. And so I think that is the ideological kind of underpinning of this policy, which, even though this policy itself is being scrapped, is likely to be the guiding logic and the guiding principle of a Truss premiership.